This is Common Criminal Podcast. I am your host, Vince Polson, welcoming back Courtney Cawthron.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing today?
So, Courtney and I, before we got started today, we were talking about spirit science, something that, really, that's something I learned about when I guess geez, that was a while ago.
Oh my
Uh,
God, those
do you
videos.
remember the spirit science videos?
Yes.
Like they were like weirdly well animated considering how poorly animated they were.
Yes, no, I remember them. And I don't remember if you got me into them or if I found them and got you guys into them, but it was just this whole thing for us. Like we were really, really into it.
Super, super
Really into
into
it.
it, and I mean stuff focusing your energy with crystals.
Yeah.
It was stuff like that, and I mean there was all kinds of stuff. And the crazy thing is, I had never taken psychedelics at that point,
Yeah, I think
which
we
to
were just
me,
still like kind of smoking weed at that point in our lives because that was so long ago. And but it
right?
was also still just really kind of presenting like a different aspect of reality to look at. I will say some of the content in there lost me a bit. I was like, all right, that's a little fucking ridiculous. But also it was so ridiculous you couldn't stop watching sometimes and like
When they started talking about I mean, it almost sounded like a Scientology indoctrination where they're talking about like, oh, well, the lost city of Atlantis, and then it sank, and all the people like got scattered across the earth. It's like, wait a minute,
yeah.
you're not going to start talking about Xenu.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah. So
But but the point does still stand. Some of the cool stuff that was in there, and I think, something that people like to disregard is woo, but there actually is something to it as far as, folk not they say, what is it? The Secret, the book that a lot of people are probably more familiar with,
mhm.
of, focusing your energy and manifesting your reality, and while that definitely sounds like trying to sneak a religion in on somebody, I think there really is something to it.
Like I'm definitely not an authority on this, like or not like someone above this. I practice massage therapy, different type of like body therapies and things of that nature. So, but like going into this, it's really important to acknowledge that what has kind of happened with the way, and some people, and for some things it is woo, like straight up, because what's happened is people will kind of shine a light into, like, let's say an Eastern healing modality, right? Maybe that Eastern healing modality, let's kind of like talk about Ayurveda, right? Ayurveda is
Mhm.
has existed for thousands of years. I mean, the Indian people have used that medicinal system for thousands of years, right? And then maybe crystals are involved in their healing in some way, but there's much more to it, right? And none of us speak, Indian tongue or Pali or any of the way these languages may have been written down. And so what has happened is these kids from America who get the chance to like hop over to India to study for like a month or 2 weeks might go and
Oh,
study.
yeah, petting a heavily sedated tiger.
And yeah, and they might go over there, right? And then they might like learn
Mhm,
something or study for a very brief time, and then they'll come back and they'll start like really preaching this thing, and that actually becomes like very detrimental to like that medicinal system, right? Because what happens is
mhm.
they went over there and they only experienced, if anything, one very small piece of a very broad like medicinal system. So what's happening, and then those people may come over here and try to sell it, right? Because that's what America loves to do, is
Mhm.
like they love to monetize and sell things. So then you'll start seeing, crystal healing and crystals for like different chakras, and this will kind of go into a whole nother thing about like the misnomer of the chakra system here in the U.S. was actually like mistranslated in the 1920s. Um, so anyway, you have this adulteration happening of this ancient medicine that's actually kind of based in chemistry, if you really look at it. And what they would do is they would work with certain foods that might help the body warm itself in a way, or certain foods that might cool the body based on like certain illnesses that the body might be experiencing. And really just the combination of those herbs or physical like body therapies or any of that would really be applied to one person over time. And the other thing is too, it may or may not help that person anyway, right? Because like medicine, whether it's a spirit medicine, because that's a whole nother thing. So there's a
Right.
physical medicine, there is a like spirit medicine, but I have no authority to speak on that. Um, uh, So, whether it's any of those things, it's going to kind of come back to, is that person actually going to be able to heal? Is this a sickness that can actually heal in somebody? Like whether it's a mental ailment, a physical sickness, whatever. Medicine will work, medicine won't work, or that person will heal in time.
When you were talking about about, like, certain foods and stuff like that, I remember vaguely once you had told me that, like, crystal healing supposedly was that you were, like, physically ingesting the crystals, or did I completely make that
So
up?
again, my understanding of this is also limited, so like I want to speak lightly here, but my understanding when I was briefly studying Ayurveda in my massage therapy school, um, they had actually used some of the rocks and crushed them and mixed them with other things before like using them. So you were actually like eating the minerals or of that like specific thing, but they were like crushing it and creating it into a medicine. Like they would bury it in the ground for like days with like cow shits and like ferment it.
Oh,
Yeah, no, it was
Jesus.
this really intense process, but it would but they would ferment it and then it would become this thing to help treat this specific thing. So that's what I mean. It's just like, but there
Whoa.
also may, and I don't want to discount it if it is there, but there also may be this other thing where they do use crystals for like a spirit medicine or whatever. And again, I really don't want to talk too much about that. I don't know enough about that to really speak on it. But what is,
Well, it does make me wonder though, as far as like, because I know at least in the Hindu culture, that the cow is like considered
mm-hmm,
sacred, and but then it kind of makes you wonder about things like psilocybin mushrooms, which have a tendency to grow in cow feces, and it's like I wonder. This is me completely spitballing here, but I just wonder if there was any kind of relationship between psilocybin mushrooms and their association with cows and the fields where the cows lived or anything like that. It does make you kind of pause to think for a second. Because one thing that us non-practicing Catholics like to do is try and find ways to validate other. I hate to even speak for all Catholics, but I find that a lot of Catholics that aren't practicing regularly have a tendency to try and find some level of respect in other religions, like the parallels of the Great Flood myth. It appears in almost every ancient religion has a Great Flood myth of some kind, and in Christian denominations, that's like that's Noah's Ark, basically. But then there's very similar stories in like the Hindu religion and Hindu texts that if you were to try and put it on a timeline, there's a pretty good argument that both religions say that it happened at roughly the same time, which was like
mm-hmm.
10,000 BC.
Yeah, and I mean, if you, man, we always get on some touchy shit. I love talking to you.
Yeah, yeah, we always back into
Yeah,
like a
it's good.
strange
That's
conversation,
the
but I
point.
mean that's kind of what makes the show
Yeah,
fun, I guess.
right.
Yeah, we should enjoy it while it lasts. If I ever get
Yeah, true
advertisers, they're
story.
gonna say don't talk about this shit. Which does remind me, as far as Americans liking to sell shit, I think this is a good opportunity to remind everyone I will sell out
Ah.
as soon as the option is made
Well,
available
I
to
think
me.
there's a difference in, creating content that's coming from like a humble place for you. I mean, you're just sitting down and talking and having conversations with different type of people, right? And I think there's like a lot of merit in that. I think it's another thing if
Mhm.
you learn something for a very short period of time and then try to sell that, right? Like I'm even guilty of that because I didn't understand something fully or like thought I understood something and then I didn't. And that's where like humbleness comes into admit that you are wrong on selling something or admitting that like this is just like a jewelry, it's not actually going to heal you in any way shape or form, which is how I feel for a lot of people who are making like chakra bracelets and chakra necklaces. It's just kind of like, dude, it's just like I understand where this is coming from, but also like this could just be this thing and it's nothing else, and it's kind of like taking it out of its
Well
context, I guess. So
well, another thing too about you were talking about massage, and I know that a big thing when you were in massage school that before you were
mhm.
allowed to start selling it, like before you were really allowed to charge people or charge them full price, you had to do a certain number of hours to make sure that you really
Well, yeah.
understood and appreciated what it was you were doing. And I think that, if but that's a pretty well regulated industry. possibly overregulated, depending on who you ask. Whereas, like, anybody can open a gems and stones store and sell, their little tarot cards and this and that, and there's
Yeah, and
no
that's really
vetting
true
or
because
anything of that
for
kind.
some they're going to be coming from like what is perceived as like a supernatural angle, right? And again, all of that kind of blends into like, okay, self-healing. I want to heal myself. Maybe I feel like I need some guidance. Maybe I was exposed to card reading because like I honestly will still pull a card or I'll do what's called like a page turn, right? Like I'll if I'm really feeling down and it happens at these times, I'll just like say to myself like, please turn to a page that I feel like I really need to read today or like I really need to see today. And coincidentally, almost every time there will be a paragraph in a book, or maybe I'll pull like a tarot card that will resonate with me or like say something and like bring me clarity. Maybe that's what I asked for. And I think that kind of goes in the whole reality building thing and the subconsciousness of the world that exists around us, which gets a little deeper. On the massage note, I
Mhm.
would argue that it's actually still not very regulated just because like people can still come in and like try to patent or sell like a method of massage, but I don't really think you can patent a way to like manipulate the body because they're really, in the words of my teacher, there hasn't really been anything that has not been done. I mean, people have existed for thousands of years. Like we've obviously figured some things out, and I think with
Well,
and this one's going to be a little spicy, but science is still young. Like Western science is still young, right? Like we have these, and we have these
oh,
older
very much
sciences,
so.
and I'm going to call them sciences because, respectively, in their houses of medicine, when you look at how deep that goes, like people died for those doctors to learn those herbs, and also like people are still using those medicines today successfully, and even America is going in and pulling parts from it and trying to mimic it. So, and now we're just confirming, like, oh, the brain and the body have been connected this entire time. Eastern philosophy has known that for thousands of years, right? Like how your mind is, your body is, and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
And also, this is a good opportunity to remind everyone that, this does not mean you
No,
should
please
drop
go
your
to
health
see a
insurance or
doctor. Go
stop
to a
going to see
doctor,
a doctor
please.
regularly. Well, the beautiful thing is when, one of our
Yeah,
friends, his dad was very sick, and his dad, while continuing his, like, chemo treatments and things like that, he was also exploring things like sweat lodges and other,
yeah.
decidedly more Eastern approaches, but he was doing
Mhm.
that in conjunction with Western medicine. And as is true with most things, the best way is somewhere in the middle of the two. And using the
Absolutely.
best of
Yeah.
both worlds, it puts you at a big advantage, and also it does that. Goes back to manifesting your own reality. When you feel that you're investing that amount of time and you're putting that much focus onto what you're doing to improve your recovery and what you're putting into your body, you're obviously going to put yourself at an advantage, whether that means that you're doing yoga every day or you're really, really serious about your diet and meeting with health coaches.
Yeah, exactly. And like obviously, like if I get in a car accident, I don't want folk healing. Please don't put essential oils on my arm that's chopped off. Like God, give me a doctor that knows how to do an intricate surgery. And again, like I don't ever want to dismiss Western medicine. There are benefits to it, but also there are some things with like chronic illnesses, and this is something I learned in my time in college, like that we can do to help prevent these things, but also like certain exposure to certain things will trigger these chronic illnesses, and there are ways for us to work around them, and that's what's called like preventative medicine, right? It's like, what is the type of thing I can do for myself now to prevent ever getting to that stage where my body starts like eating itself or degrading, or I get cancer, or things inflame, or I have a heart attack. Like what are the things I can do? How do my genes play into that? How does my family history, how does my family uh oh my god, what is the word, how does my family location like play into that, right? So another thing that kind of comes into play is like regional medicine, right? Like where are you from? Where is your original ancestors from? Like what kind of foods did they eat? Did they ever have access? Like I think about this stuff on a larger scale. Like we talk a lot about gut biology and what you can ingest and what you can't ingest, like what causes like inflammation style reactions, right? Where like people get swelling or they get GERD or something, versus like
Hmm.
what is the most optimal food like I can be putting in my body. And that's where, the combination of Western, science and Eastern like application, and also just in general functional preventative medicine can really meet, so we can actually take a microscope to look at your gut biology and say, hey, when you eat this thing, your body's like, no, 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 no. But when you eat this thing, your body's like, hell yeah, more of that.
This is the first generation that we've like really seen the humankind actually suffer from over consumption. Like it's all throughout history, we have always had this problem of being at a caloric
Mm,
deficit, and that's pretty much been the case at any point you can pick in the history of humanity. And in the last 30 years or so, well, I guess maybe a little longer, probably in the last 50 years or so, has been the first time where we've seen people regularly suffer from diseases of overconsumption and having a calorie surplus,
mhm.
which is I mean, we're at a strange time
Yeah,
nowadays.
things are really weird, man, and it's just like it's interesting to see how like the development of technology is like really exploding and making us able to communicate more, but also giving the ability of misinformation to spread easily. And like who's like when we
Oh,
have,
anti-vaxxers.
well, I mean, this is a positive and a negative thing, but also it's like, when we, and I mean, this can even happen in books. So this isn't just something that has come along with like technology. I mean, that's why you see, again, like in the words of my teacher, like you'll see second editions and third editions of books, right? Because they'll go in and they'll discover that some things are wrong or some things weren't quite accurate. So they publish another book. So information you could have even read in a book could have been misinforming, right? But you would have thought it was
Hmm.
right for so long because, oh, well, it was in the book and there was no way to vet the author. And we still have that. I mean, anybody can publish a book, just like anybody can publish an article. Anybody can create content, and they may or may not have the knowledge or the studies to really say like, hey, this is, or even access to create that information positively, right? Because we can have scientists
and
publish information, but were they lobbied? you know, so
and obviously any asshole can publish a podcast.
hey.
Hey.
Well, I don't think we're selling anything, so
Well, maybe not
not
yet,
not
but
yet.
once I get the chance.
Well, I'm not like trying to talk down any of this too. I think more importantly, it's just like a state of awareness. Like I actually just sent you a link from someone who has like a lot of awareness like about the whole chakras thing that we were remotely discussing, and where I like figured out like, okay, like back in the 1920s there was actually a mistranslation about the chakras here in the West, and so some of our understanding of chakras here in the West is completely like built in Western idea, and it was in 1920 versus like being based out of the ideas of where it really originated. So that's just like a small example of like that kind of thing that can occur. So you can just look at that in your own time.
No, I see this article that you the real story on the
Yeah.
chakras, and I'm definitely gonna link it in the video because I'm just kind of like looking through some of the emboldened like sections of it, and I'm like, geez, this is there's obviously something we did
Well,
very
and I mean,
wrong
and
here.
here's the funny thing, okay? Like, and again, this goes back to the whole reality building thing. It's kind of like a really rough area, and not everybody's going to agree with it. But we can always kind of talk about, okay, like what is healing to me may not be healing to you, or like necessarily what you need. Um, and if someone like really believes in something and it's helping them somehow, can we consider that a medicine? But then that can also be really dangerous to say too, because then you have no jurisdiction on like, everything can be healing. That's also a really dangerous thing to say. Like not getting vaccinated, that's very dangerous. You know what I mean? Selling
Right.
essential oils and the idea that people can eat essential oils, that's very dangerous. Like my essential oil teacher taught us about 25 oils. She was a chemist, not just a MLM company like rep. And she said if you ever eat an oil, you can get like brain, like neurotoxicity. You can have liver failure and reactions. Like you can have poisoning. So, and then we have places like doTERRA, and I use doTERRA oils, but only for diffusing them. But we have companies like that, and if you look into their books or look into some of their suggestions, like they were sued. They were sued for misinformation.
Right.
They had to I unfortunately know somebody who was moving those oils, and they were saying, oh, you can eat them, and I'm like, you really shouldn't. You just really, really, really shouldn't at all,
Yeah.
because like you're not a chemist. I'm sorry. Like essential oils are chemistry, man. That's like you use chemistry to distill that
Right.
oil.
I mean, it shouldn't be so hard to convince people, like, not to put some things in their mouth, but
Hey.
unfortunately.
But when something's in a book, it's a lot easier to say, like, "Oh, but I saw this in a book." And it's like, "Well, I read a book saying, you shouldn't put sun lotion on, but that's a bad idea. Like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna put sun lotion on or sunscreen."
Right.
Um,
Well, a lot of the problem nowadays too, I say this all the time, and I kind of
mhm,
started saying it as a joke like a couple months ago. I was on vacation with my parents, and my sister is very, very meticulous. She's always the first one to say, like, "Oh, where did you read that?" Because she knows that it's really easy to call someone out on their source if
mhm,
they're talking out of their ass about something. But one thing I pointed out to her was like, she had called me on it because I used to have a big problem with it. She trained me to be much better about being able to cite my source when,
yeah,
especially if you say something controversial. So I stopped and I said, "Well, Bonnie, that was actually an article published by
mhm,
Newsweek, verified by NewsGuard. But just to point out, you can Google basically fucking any opinion that you have, and you can find some asshole
yep.
online to verify your opinion with an article or newspaper or something. So, I mean, we're oversaturated with this kind of knowledge, which is why now more than ever, it is important to have a strong bullshit meter and to remember that you can't simply trust
Exactly. And I
everything
mean,
you
like,
read online.
when it comes to like even studies, like it's good for us to look at studies because those are people that actually took the time in their understanding of a subject matter to use a hypothesis and put it through a process and say, like, oh, did this actually help anybody? Right. And I think like what you're saying is very accurate. It's like we're in a time where we're oversaturated with information and we're undersaturated with experts on that information. Um, yeah, that's what I would say on that, man.
And yeah, it's well, unfortunately, it's a sort of emerging knowledge more recently, as people try and get back in touch with a lot of things that we've lost, and that's really great. But the problem is that there's, if you ask someone like me or basically anyone and you say, "Well, who's the premier authority on Eastern medicine in America?" And you were to ask me that, I would have no idea. I wouldn't even begin to be able to tell you other than maybe Russell Brand, I guess. Uh, right. But if you say, well, who's the premier authority on Western medicine? And other than maybe
No,
the attorney general, or not
it's
attorney,
okay,
Jesus
dude. It's
Christ, what a
okay.
moron. Uh, sorry. Other than Oh, good lord. Just fucking
Oh,
jump out the
never hard
window,
on
Vince.
yourself.
But no, other than, I mean, you could just say pretty much like the head of the CDC or like even just your local doctor. Just like go talk to like your primary care physician, and that's generally good enough. The problem is like your primary
Mhm.
care physician went to school for like at least 8 years to be that well informed on Eastern med or Western medicine. So as far as Eastern medicine goes, it could just be like some asshole who spends a lot of time on YouTube, and then they start telling you to do dangerous stuff like drinking essential oils. So it Right. So it's really easy for somebody to claim to be an expert because if you spend an hour studying this online, you know more about it than 95% of people. And that's not good enough.
And it's really not, but then, like, we get into this misconception of, "Well, I've had this study, I understand, like, the synchronization of these movements that will help this person, so, like, I feel like I have a grasp or, like, a good understanding of this." And then again, but you really don't know shit about it. Like, and I it's kind of funny that you ask, like, who's the authority in, like, the Eastern like religions, right? Like, and then coming over here, like, do we even have like an authority? And I think the really interesting difference in like Eastern medicine and Western medicine is like there's a really strong sense of lineage in Eastern philosophy and Eastern like martial arts, and like people really like revere their master's teachings, and like what we see is like certain teachings may be dying out because people aren't taking the time to really like study, right? Like these people would just totally go, like, if you wanted to be a monk, right? You have to absolve everything out of your life, like absolve any debts you have, like remove anything that might like prevent you from becoming a full monk. And then you live in a monastery and you have a very rigid thing and you study these teachings like day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. They can be physical practices, they can be mental practices, whatever, like mind and body mastery, right? And there's a very strong sense of like really disciplined study and really respectful like actions, like, and over here that's very different, right? Like we, oh, I paid this guy like, $20,000 to go take a class with him, but is he like a good professor, right? Like these, and oh, my doctor went to school for 8 years, but he fucking sucked and misdiagnosed me, right? So it's just interesting to see, like, and then we do have like people we revere, right? Like we have our like science people like Albert Einstein, and even his theories are starting to get upturned, right? So even these figureheads, or Nikola Tesla, right? Like all of these people we have like reverence for, and those people who have continued to study, like, okay, how do we really understand, electricity with the way, Tesla is now producing cars that are only electric, right? So those people who are probably producing those kinds of things are really taking that time to study and study and study some more and experiment and really dedicate their lives, versus like a lot of common people, right, who we're just kind of like in the midst of our lives and we're just working jobs to like get by and survive and like kind of consume, what's being sold to us, or what those, people who have the time or the money to go study those things, and most of the time it's like a product, right? Like you could find people who geek the fuck out over like brand names, but I don't really run into too many people who know like plants by looking at them. So it's just a really interesting difference. And my teacher was telling me, and I'm gonna like briefly give this story, but she was saying how like, okay, like in um, like uniforms, for example, right? Like she was saying in that setting, most of the time they're wearing a uniform. Um, and there's a lot of like respect for the teacher, right? Like, well, you can even take like Japan for example, right? Like a lot of those kids
Mhm.
wear uniforms, and they usually clean. Some of the schools have the students cook for like their own lunch, like, and there's like a really disciplined respect and understanding, right? And like the lack of clothing difference actually allows more focus to go like less into the environment and more onto like the studies that are coming in, right?
Hey, wait a minute. You convinced me you and Ashley conned me into taking Japanese in high
Yeah.
school. Now, all of a sudden, I just remembered why I did that for 2 years for a language I could literally barely say hello in.
Yeah, I mean, that class was hard. But that aside, it's like, so that's their version of equalness, right? It's like we're all wearing the same thing, we all have respect for each other, we're all here trying to learn the same thing. And it's like, and it's also like a mind attention thing, right? Like if you're sitting in a room and there's a
Mhm.
lot of bright fucking colors and like crazy stuff going on, you're kind of probably going to be distracted by the stuff like in the room, right? And I'm not saying like, this is kind of like maybe a feng shui perspective, or like, but if someone's like sitting in a onesie unicorn outfit, right, in your college class, you're gonna have a hard time kind of like focusing on the professor. You're gonna be like, dude, that guy's wearing a fucking onesie. That's so fucking awesome. And it's gonna distract you from your studies, right? Versus here in America, right? Like our version and view of equanimity is like, I should be allowed to wear whatever I want, look however I want, dress however I want. You can't tell me anything or you're oppressing me. And that is our equanimity.
Well, first of all, I wanna point out that you and I apparently would have an entirely different reaction to the unicorn onesie. Uh, but no, aside from that too, and I mean, I love tattoos on other people. I love seeing great tattoos that aren't on me.
Mhm.
Uh, but I mean, my girlfriend will tell you that I'm full of shit because she's like, "Well, you hate it every time I say I'm gonna get a tattoo," and it's like, no. Well, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't make you less professional. I don't think because you have tattoos, you're any worse of a funeral director or a car salesman or whatever job you have, machinist. I don't give a shit. Doctor, even you can have a tattoo on your face, and it doesn't make you a worse doctor. But it does change the way that people perceive
Yes.
you. And if you have a job where you have to deal with other people, whether it's your coworkers or your boss or like customers, especially customers, though,
Mhm.
how people perceive you is 95% of your level of success. And if you've got a tattoo on your face, you're going to have a hard time convincing people that you are just as professional with or without it.
Mhm. And it's also kind of like, how do you want to be perceived in the real world, right? So like with my social media, right? Like I obviously have separate accounts for business, professional, like personal kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
So like obviously I would not post any of the content that I'm posting on my art, more like freedom art and dancing Instagram on my professional Instagram, right? Like because I don't want people to see me in a different light because I feel like that could be misleading um to them, or like they could see me in a way that may no longer have this strong sense of boundary, right? Like between them and me, and like my kind of like personal space, and like
Oh,
me as a service provider and them as a service receiver kind of thing, right? Like, does that make sense?
it's funny you mentioned, like, the dancing thing, and you know what? I'm not even gonna go there. I'm not gonna make fun of you on the podcast. I'm gonna edit
That's
this
fine.
out. No, I was gonna say, I remember when you first started with the, alright, actually, I'm not gonna edit this
Like,
out.
go
I
for it,
remember
dude.
when you first started, with the pole dancing thing, and I remember, you were living with my ex-girlfriend
Yeah.
at the time, and we had already broken up, so obviously it didn't matter what she did, I was gonna be upset about no matter anything she did. Uh, but it's like, "Oh, yeah, she's pole dancing." I was like, "Oh, yeah, real classy, great job." And she's like, "Whatever, it's, like, great exercise." I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure it fucking is great exercise." But then but I see you doing it more recently, and I'm like, "Oh, well, there's no doubt about it. That is a great core, leg, and arm workout. There is no doubt in my mind." But I just want to simply point out, if I put up pictures of me or videos of me doing squat presses, not nearly as many people are gonna like or comment on
Yeah, I
it.
mean, like, and that's true, but also, like, and again, that goes back to like how we view things, right? Like how we view things and how we put them in a box. Like, I don't want to do anything besides pole dance for fun and fitness. Like, I do not want to put myself in an environment with seedy, creepy people for money. I don't want to ever do that, you know? And for me, I just, I was a jazz and hip hop dance person for like 5 or 6 years, and like this adds a whole.
Oh, yeah, you guys went on, like, ABDC, didn't you?
No.
Or you did some qualifying
I tried to
round or
compete to
something?
get, like, a thing to, like, go try out for, So You Think You Can Dance, and I fucked it up so bad. That was the most embarrassing moment of my life, so I don't wanna talk about it anymore.
Oh,
Like, I hated
well, if it makes you feel better, I'll show you a
it.
video of my first attempt at stand-up.
Yeah, congrats on that, by the way. Um,
Oh, geez, don't congratulate me until I
Dude,
actually
you
make
had the
one
balls
person
to
laugh.
even go, like, that's big. No, there are people still sitting in their closet, like, fucking jealous that you even tried, like, don't worry. Um But yeah, no, that's the thing is like, I mean, I fell. I was actually halfway like wanted to post the video of me falling to show like how much strength this shit requires. And like if you are holding on to this thing wrong, you will eat shit.
No, I mean, I believe it, but also, like, I feel like I'd bend it if I even tried,
Yeah,
so
personally, I think you look great, dude. Give it a try sometime. So
wow,
yeah,
thanks.
dude, it's actually, I mean, once you're spinning, you're just like, oh yeah, I'm going so fast. And it's just really
Well,
childish.
I remember your boyfriend was like a boss at it. It was like like he went at it. It was like he was like a natural. Like he made it look like it was supposed to be really easy. And I mean, that dude could
Yeah.
climb.
Yeah, no, and then he also had a gymnast friend that came over and he's like, "Oh my god, you have a pole that's fucking awesome." And he like jumped on it and just immediately went sideways like a fucking flag. And I was like, "I hate you." Like, I hate how
Right. I mean, again, I don't mean to sound like I'm knocking it. Obviously, I started out by making a
Oh
couple
yeah,
jokes
no.
about it, but I mean, seriously, it does look like
It's
some
fun.
serious exercise. And really, the truth is,
But
I'm just jealous
but
I can't move
again,
like that
I
anymore.
wouldn't want people to see me in that, especially given like that massage and body work already has a weird stigma around it. Like I think it was Jim Gaffigan that made a really funny joke. He was like, "Yeah, so I went to go get a massage," and he was like, my friend was like, a massage, eh?" And he just like made a funny face, and like the crowd laughed, and then they were like, "I bet massage therapists are the only people that have to deal with that kind of weird surrounding of it." He's like, did you get a massage or did you get a massage, right? Because like there's this weird stigma around body
Right.
work. So
And it's like, what other professions other than strippers, which requires zero training, no
nope,
certification, you don't have to pay to go to
just a lot of
school,
daddy
and that's
issues.
the only other job. where people are like, "Oh, yeah, what are you doing after work?" You know? Like,
Yeah, and it's just like
it's gross.
yeah, so I would obviously, like, never meld those 2 things together. Anyway, moving on. It's just that's just
Right. Sorry.
no, 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 it's funny. And I mean, that's the point, right? That's why we're here. We're here to talk about these things. Um,
Right.
so but yeah, getting to the whole point, it's like you don't want to be misperceived, especially when you're trying to, like, carry a certain respect for something forward, right? Like, in the words
Absolutely.
of my teacher, she was like, "I don't wanna be your friends," and, like, that's not a personal thing, but it's just like, I want you to perceive me in this way because I'm carrying this for you. And, if, sometimes there are times, where like, drinking happens or whatever, but that's just like, that's not an aspect that you want to share with your students, right? Because then I might misperceive her as my friend, or like there might be a lack of boundary there that may need to exist there. So the respect stays there. Like there's all of these like little facets. And like coming back to like the classroom and the discipline and the respect thing, like, do we really have that anymore with all the crazy oversaturation, and not just of like marketing and things too, but like each person's individual life has become like a
Well,
marketing thing, and not that's a bad thing. It's great that we have all these things.
I'm just saying, imagine like, imagine people who like graduated from like UVA when it was like a very strict Ivy League law
Mhm,
school, and then those people now, I guess now they're what, like 40 years
mhm.
old, and they're pretty, they're in critical years of their career because I mean, at 40, you're pretty much on the cusp of like you're literally not going to go any further, or you're going to go straight to the top. And I mean, imagine being in that position where you're at this like almost Ivy League Virginia University, and then the stigma surrounding UVA now is that people drop out after their first year because they got addicted to cocaine.
God damn.
And so like right, well, I'm saying like but if that's like a very Western way of looking at like what happens, but that kind of goes with the Eastern thing too, if you study massage or like some kind of jujitsu or something like that, but then the quality of the school goes absolutely to
Yes.
shit, you can't go around and say like, "Oh, I studied under that person." They're gonna be like, "Oh, you mean the rehab guy?"
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like it's so I mean it's gray and it's not like, and I mean like I said, there are like people in Japan who watches videos on making up tatami mats. Me, hi. um but they were talking about like, tatami mat making is very intricate. It is a very specific. I mean, tatami mats are used in very specific ceremonial um aspects, and they are in people's homes as well, and they're supposed to lay certain ways, and they're supposed to be a certain thickness, and like there were generations of people like learning how to make tatami, and it's just like, it's so fascinating to see. It's like, wow, like even just trade arts, right? Like even trade skills were being passed down in families because these families would know really well how to make a tatami mat and would teach these people and be able to repair a tatami mat and know the importance and the value of a tatami mat, even if they're not really used so much anymore. There are people who are still learning that trade, right? So,
Oh, and if you wanna see something, kinda similar in nature, the
mhm,
VMFA, well, I guess for anybody who is out of state, that's Virginia Museum of Fine
mhm,
Arts in Richmond. If you ever get a chance to go there and look at the Japanese swords and armor exhibit, like, they have all kinds of very, very old Japanese art, but included with the art are swords and armor, and you can see swords that were made 1,500 years ago, and you can see swords that were made 500 years ago, and it's the same family lineage
yeah,
making these swords. Over 1,000 years, it's the same families practicing
yeah,
the same trade. And so, I mean, that absolutely speaks to what you're talking about as far as, like, the reverence of, like, of culture and history and passing down this knowledge from generation to generation. And it wasn't just their medicine, it was also their
yeah.
art
And
of
that's
war
the
as well.
fascinating thing is like when it comes to like now, right? Like now, and it's so interesting because like sometimes I deal with like, okay, I feel really disconnected to like my family line, and I don't really know like much about what my family did, like anything my family like really specialized in. And I'm just like kind of here trying to figure out, okay, what really resonates with me and like my existence, and like what's something I can pass down, or like, and the one big thing for my family is honestly kind of like cooking and like and that's really all I can think of,
I guess in a way I followed in my parents' footsteps. You know, my dad was an electrician, my mom was an instrumentation. Well, I guess they're both still in those trades. And you know, ultimately I went to school for mechatronics, which is a lot like instrumentation, but you also have to have a pretty strong knowledge of electric theory, which is a lot of what it takes to be a good electrician. And then you have to learn like programming and programmable logic as well. So I mean, in a way, I think it still exists, but it's not like I learned how to do this from my
Yeah.
parents. Like, you know, we have these learning institutions and you know, no, I don't even want to crack the seal on how I feel about colleges in America.
Next
But
episode.
yeah, on the next episode with Vince and Courtney. Uh, But, actually, you know, that would actually be kind of fun next
Yeah.
time. You know, next time we should just fucking talk about the problem with colleges. You and I were both college dropouts who went back to school to learn a trade. So, I mean, in a way, we're not experts on it, but I mean, honestly, I thought about changing the name of this show to Two Assholes Don't Know What They're Talking About.
Beautiful, beautiful. I like. I like.
Uh, yeah, well, and on that note, in summary, uh yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of benefits of Eastern medicine and these Eastern almost. I hate to use the word cultural appropriation because it's like a trigger for right wing people now when you say cultural appropriation. But I think at its core, that's where that phrase came from. Is that people take this like they have all this knowledge of Western medicine, and then they just try and sprinkle in this Eastern knowledge, and it's like, hey, it's not that simple. It's pretty unfair to say that this thousands of years of knowledge accumulated and you're going to pretend like you learned it because you spent 3 weeks in fucking
Yeah.
India.
And I mean,
Yeah.
and that could be a whole nother episode, like on the use and misuse of that word specifically too. The biggest thing is just like not adulterating or like recognizing that a lot is being sold all of the time and like really just trying to see like, okay, is this something I really need? Is this really what it's being said it is? Like, is this person really a guru? Like, is this modality actually healing? Things like that. But
Right.
again,
And in general, whether it has to do with medicine or just in general, it could be politics or foreign policy, whatever. Whenever you hear something that resonates with you and you say to yourself like, "You know what? I think that that's the right thing." And again, medicine, politics, whether or not the school budget should be increased, whatever. If you believe that what you think is right, then you should have no problem trying to find the benefits of the way other people perceive it, of what the other side of the argument is. If you think that smaller government is always better, then you should have no trouble trying to find the benefits of a large government solution. And at the end, you might find that the answer is somewhere in the middle, or you might find that you know, you truly believe you were right all along. The worst thing that could possibly come from it is that you're just better at shooting down people who don't
or
agree
that
with you.
you're wrong.
So
Yeah.
right, or that you're wrong. Like the worst case scenario is that you're really good at arguing your position. Best case scenario is that you actually fucking learned something, which is apparently a really bad thing in America. But yeah, but that also has to do like if you think you know, if you're I'm personally a big believer in vaccines. I did a little bit of research on anti-vax and I said to myself, "Wow, that seems really fucking dangerous." For anybody who's anti-vax, just take a minute to look at the other side, the information that you're not
Yeah.
that's not being presented to you. Just look at it and just say like rationally, like how does this look? Like is there some merits to this? And then it goes right back into the Eastern medicine and everything too. Like should you ingest those essential oils? What's the worst thing that could happen if you do? And maybe look that up before you just decide that the guy who lives up the street from you was right.
Yeah, yeah, man. And I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
things too. I mean, like, you know, when we really look at like Eastern philosophy, even and like the mind and the stability of the mind and the stability of the body and like physical reality, it's like, what can we give ourselves like to make sure that our body and our mind stay stable? Like I feel like when we realize like the bigger things in life and when we can like examine being wrong and being okay with being wrong and forgiving ourselves and having a space of self-compassion for being wrong and making mistakes, whether that was on a very small personal level or if it became like a big thing. There's a whole lot of ego that people like uphold um, when they're wrong. And I say that as someone who's been wrong a fucking lot.
Yeah. Probably anybody who's been on this podcast has
Yeah,
some
I
sort of
mean,
record in being wrong, which is also usually that's part of being a person who's easy to talk to is being wrong a lot and realizing that there have been times in the past where you're wrong, and
well,
it makes for
exactly.
much healthier conversations. I
Well,
hate
and
when
that's the
people
other
tell me
thing
that
too,
they're
is
basically
like
always right.
growth comes from acknowledgement of like your past doings and your past self and like how you want to move forward and how you want to move forward to like heal, whether it's yourself or a relationship or others. Like, it's recognizing like, hey, like I really fucked up and I'm really sorry, and I've learned that that is not the person I need to be, or that is not something I can no longer carry, or that's a piece of information I no longer believe in, and really just opening up to like the potential of the future and like what's possible. And that requires a lot of self-compassion, and that's really hard for us in particular, I think, here in the West, because we really beat ourselves up like over here, right? It's like work hard and then die, right? If you're not working hard, like that's the reason why you're not successful.
Oh,
Like,
good lord. I
yeah.
did episode 40 a couple days ago, right after I found out
Mm.
a guy who was pretty close to me had passed away, and, uh and yeah, it just reminded me of this really awful memory. Anybody who hasn't listened to episode 40, if you're having a really good day, don't
Disclaimer.
watch it. Yeah, but no, I mean, it's the truth though. I mean, for whatever reason, the Western idea is that
Yeah.
you work hard and work yourself to death. And a lot of people have this idea like, oh, I'm gonna work really, really hard and I'm gonna build this business and then I'll be able to retire by 55. And then next thing you know, you're fucking 60 years old laying on your deathbed, like, well, shit, I thought I had so much more time to cram in all the shit that I wanted to do.
Yeah. And that's the whole weird thing about like growth in technology and like expectations within like growth in technology, and also just like the exposure to others' lives. And we see the highlights, but we may not know like, oh, that person came from a really rich family, or oh, that person had a really good network of people that allowed them to receive what they needed quicker, versus like people who are just like one person like really trying to get themselves out there, but they lack certain things to put themselves ahead. So then we have this like constant internal struggle surrounding like some of those things, and moving past those, or like might like be hard on ourselves about like, oh, why am I still not there, oh, why am I still not there, I've been working so hard and this person that hasn't been doing that so long has it suddenly, and it requires a lot of like self reflection. And I think that's kind of the whole purpose of the nature of reality, is the diversity of existence and acknowledgement of the elements that exist behind somebody and their success, and their ability to reach that version of their success or whatever. Anyway, not to get too spacey, but
Hey,
that's
well,
but that's kind of the point. So
no, I mean you do bring up a lot of good points, and I do agree that some people do have it easier than others. And as I learned from another successful white man,
oh
it was called it's a Grant Cardone thing. It's called the 10 times rule. That
god.
regardless of the advantages that other people have or the disadvantages that you inherently have, the whole idea is that if you work 10 times as hard as if you work 10 times harder than the next person, then your success is inevitable, regardless of whatever disadvantages you have or whatever advantages they have or nepotism they're receiving. That if you work really, really hard, you're gonna inevitably overcome that. And again, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Sometimes unfortunately, you might be the person who has to work harder. And that's easy for me to say because I'm a white guy. How much better could it possibly get?
God.
And then alternatively, acknowledging that sometimes you have to work harder. And if you do work harder, you'll succeed. But then alternatively, like you have to look around and say, like, some people do need a little extra help. And if they are trying that much harder, they kind of deserve a little extra help. So, again, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and I think that maybe that's the thing we can really take away from today.
Yeah, I would think so. And just on that note too, like, I mean, if you're working that hard, you have the discipline.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
fun
And not
yeah,
just motivation. Motivation is the spark. The discipline is the tender and the logs that keep the fire going is the
yeah, man,
discipline.
yeah.
All right.
Well,
Well,
thank
on
you
that
thanks
note,
for
we're
having
going to
me.
listen to some Keenan Rainer music and close out this episode before it goes longer than 50, well, an hour. I did a 2-hour episode the other day, and I don't think anybody's going to show me that they appreciated it.
All good, man. I mean, I'm sure it'll get there. So, but thanks for talking to me again, man. It's always a pleasure coming on the show, and yeah, I look forward to our next session.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to do this again very soon. But anyway, thanks for listening, y'all.